My name is Alina Vance, and I am 32 years old. I live in Havenwood, a quiet, isolated coastal town where the wind always carries the scent of salt, and the constant murmur of the ocean is the only lullaby I have ever truly known. I used to be an architect, not just any architect, but one who saw buildings as living things, breathing structures that held stories and secrets within their walls. My designs were often called ethereal, inspired by the ancient folklore of the sea and the rugged beauty of the cliffs. I poured my soul into my sketches, believing that architecture was a conversation between the earth and the sky. I preferred my own company, finding joy in the precise lines of a blueprint, the texture of a new sketch pad, and the occasional warm smile from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who often brought me homemade clam chowder. People said my buildings seemed to whisper that they felt both ancient and brand new, filled with a sense of mystery. This was my world, my passion, my everything. It was a life of quiet fulfillment, dedicated to bringing beauty into existence. Then Clara Thorne arrived, or rather, Clara Thorne showed her true colors. Clara had been my mentor, a celebrated architect whose charisma masked a heart as cold and sharp as a winter gale. She was someone I had admired, trusted, even loved like an older sister. I had shared with her my magnum opus, a revolutionary eco-friendly community design that integrated sustainable living with the natural landscape, a concept I had spent years developing, a design I believed would change the world for the better. It was more than a project. It was my vision for a harmonious future. But Clara stole it. She presented my exact design as her own, winning a prestigious national award that should have been mine. Worse, she publicly accused me of plagiarism and of having a mental breakdown, effectively destroying my reputation and career in a single, devastating stroke. She painted me as a mad artist, delusional and unstable, unfit for the industry. My designs were my soul, and Clara had not just stolen them, she had ripped out my soul and claimed it for herself. Now I am isolated, living in a small, damp cottage by the sea, the salty air doing little to soothe the bitter taste of betrayal and the crushing weight of lost dreams. The constant roar of the ocean felt less like a lullaby and more like a mocking laugh. I am unsatisfied with how my life has become a hollow echo of what it once was, a ghost haunting its own ruins. Clara Thorne, even from afar, had become my tormentor, the architect of my despair. I tried to fight back, to reclaim what was mine. I spent weeks meticulously gathering every scrap of evidence I had. Faded sketches with my initial dates, early digital drafts saved on forgotten hard drives, old emails detailing my progress, even text messages where Clara praised my genius months before claiming it as her own. I believed the truth, if presented clearly, would be undeniable. I reached out to former colleagues, those who knew my work ethic and my integrity, hoping they would stand with me. I wanted to clear my name, to expose Clara for the fraud she was. But Clara Thorne was a master manipulator, powerful and well-connected. She had carefully constructed a narrative of her own, painting herself as the wronged mentor whose brilliant protege had succumbed to mental illness and lash out. My attempts were dismissed, seen as the desperate ravings of a disturbed artist, just as Clara had predicted. Some colleagues offered their condolences, but none offered their support. They feared Clara's influence, her ability to make or break careers. Legal action proved to be a dead end. Clara had better lawyers, a team who skillfully spun my evidence as inconclusive or even fabricated. She had subtly altered documents, covered her tracks so meticulously that my own proofs seemed to crumble under scrutiny. Each effort to reveal the truth only backfired, sending me deeper into the abyss of helplessness. Colleagues began to actively avoid my calls, my emails. My former firm, pressured by Clara's legal team, even threatened me with a defamation lawsuit if I continued to spread false accusations. Public opinion, fueled by Clara's carefully curated media presence, turned further against me. The local papers, once praising my talent, now subtly hinted at my supposed instability. Then a letter arrived, formal and elegant, bearing Clara's letterhead. It was a passive-aggressive masterpiece, full of feigned concern, suggesting I seek professional help for my paranoia and delusions. It was a gloating reminder of her triumph and my utter defeat. I started to question my own sanity, isolated in my damp cottage, with only the endless gray sea for company. The lines between reality and nightmare began to blur. I spent sleepless nights poring over old files, seeing Clara's triumphant, smirking face superimposed over my own designs. I started having vivid nightmares, hearing whispers of my failure, seeing Clara's fabricated success splashed across every television screen. I saw fleeting shadows in my cottage, felt inexplicable cold spots, a creeping sensation that Clara's unseen presence was here, mocking me even in my solitude. I tried to find solace in my old artistic passion, to sketch, to design, to lose myself in the lines and forms, but my hand shook uncontrollably, my mind a blank canvas devoid of inspiration. The problem was no longer just Clara's theft, it was the theft of my identity, my self-worth, my very peace of mind. I was a husk, hollowed out by injustice. The lowest point came when a letter arrived from my landlord. It was a notice to vacate, citing unpaid rent. I was completely broke, my meager savings depleted by legal fees and months of unemployment. As I crumpled the paper, my eyes caught a news report on the flickering television screen of my ancient set. Clara Thorne, radiant and poised, was breaking ground on the eco-community, proudly talking about her vision, standing on the very blueprint of my stolen dream. A crushing wave of defeat washed over me. All truly felt lost. I sat by the window, watching the relentless gray ocean churn, feeling a cold, dark resolve settle in the deepest part of my heart. This was no longer just about justice. This was about an eye for an eye, a soul for a soul. The world would not listen to my words. It needed to see, to feel, to experience what Clara Thorne truly was. It needed a different kind of truth. My revenge could not be conventional. It needed to be art, a performance, something Clara would never, ever forget. A darkness, subtle and creeping, began to bloom within me, colder than the sea, more insidious than any shadow. I decided my revenge would be a masterpiece, an artistic act of retribution, using my architectural skills not to build, but to dismantle. I remembered Clara's deepest secret, a vulnerability she had once confessed to me in a moment of drunken candor, her profound, almost pathological superstition. She harbored a secret fear of old curses, haunted places, and vengeful spirits, a fear I had once found amusing but now understood as her Achilles heel. Havenwood, my quiet town, had a history ripe for this. There was a local legend about an old house on the cliffs, called the Whispering House, said to have collapsed during a violent storm decades ago. Its owner, a gifted but forgotten artist, had vanished without a trace after being betrayed by a wealthy patron who stole his designs. Locals whispered that his spirit still haunted the cliffs, seeking justice. I began to meticulously research the legend, delving into dusty archives, old newspaper clippings, and local folklore. I gathered every detail I could about the artist, the house, the patron, and the supposed curse. Then, I started my work. My installations were subtle, insidious modifications to Clara's various properties and public spaces where she frequently visited or had ongoing projects. These were not destructive acts, but highly symbolic, psychological interventions. I started with Clara's isolated vacation home, perched on a cliff overlooking the same tumultuous sea as my cottage. Under the cloak of darkness, I subtly altered the wiring of a light fixture in her study, the room where she often worked, to cast a specific, distorted shadow on the wall, one that mimicked the gnarled branches of a dead tree from the Whispering House legend. I embedded a small, intricately carved wooden charm, mimicking a symbol from the legend, into a section of the wall Clara often leaned against, just beneath a painting of a stormy sea. The charm was ancient-looking, carved by my own hands, imbued with my silent, burning intent. Then, I moved onto her downtown office, where I rearranged a few seemingly innocuous pieces of modern art, shifting their angles to subtly form a pattern from the old curse, a pattern visible only from a certain vantage point, the one Clara's desk offered. Finally, I turned my attention to the construction site of the eco-community itself, my stolen dream. There, among the framework and scaffolding, I used my knowledge of building materials to etch faint, almost invisible symbols into specific beams, symbols from the legend, placing them just within Clara's line of sight as she walked through the site, barely noticeable at first glance, but impossible to unsee once spotted. Each installation was designed to be almost imperceptible at first, a subliminal suggestion, then slowly, terrifyingly revealing itself, eroding Clara's sense of security and reality. I left no direct evidence, no fingerprints, no trace of my presence. I became a ghost, an unseen force, weaving my artistry into her stolen life. Clara, initially dismissive, attributing the strange occurrences to stress or an overactive imagination, slowly began to notice things. the specific shadow always falling across her desk, the recurring pattern emerging from seemingly random objects, the faint scent of mildew and salt where there shouldn't be, the almost inaudible whispers carried on the wind that seemed to murmur her name, or even fragments of my stolen designs. She grew increasingly agitated, her paranoia blossoming. She installed more security cameras, hired private investigators, but they found nothing. Her rational mind struggled to explain the increasingly unnerving occurrences. She started seeing the patterns of the cursed whispering house in the blueprints she had stolen from me, making her believe that my wronged spirit was haunting her through her own ill-gotten work. The climax arrived on the day of the grand groundbreaking ceremony for the eco-community, my original design, now Clara's ultimate triumph. I was there, a silent specter in the crowd, dressed in dark clothing, watching Clara step onto the elevated platform to give her speech. Months of meticulously placed psychological torment had frayed her nerves. This was my final, grand installation. I had subtly manipulated the existing sound system, embedding subliminal whispers, faint sounds of the sea, a mournful sigh, the barely audible echoes of the artist's curse, mixed into the pre-recorded ambient music and applause. I had also tampered with the projectors, engineering them to display fleeting, barely perceptible images of ancient symbols and spectral figures from the Whispering House, legend for a millisecond at a time, just as Clara looked their way. I had even arranged for a small, hidden device to emit a low-frequency tremor, an unsettling vibration that would run through the platform and the ground, designed to be felt more than heard. Clara, already a wreck from weeks of escalating psychological warfare, began her speech, her voice a little too high-pitched, her eyes darting nervously. As she spoke, the images flickered, the whispers seeped into her ears, the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. Her facade cracked. She faltered, her words becoming disjointed. She saw the spectral figures flash across the screens, heard the whispers of betrayal, felt the earth tremble. Her carefully constructed world shattered. She dropped the microphone, her eyes wide with terror, pointing frantically into the crowd. "It's him, the artist, he's here. And Alina, her ghost, they're everywhere, they're in my head, they're in my work," she shrieked, her voice echoing grotesquely through the sound system. She babbled incoherently about curses, ghosts, stolen souls, accusing random people in the front row of being Alina's spirit. The public, her adoring audience, witnessed Clara Thorne's complete and utter breakdown, her carefully crafted image crumbling into raw, unadulterated madness. She was dragged away, screaming, by bewildered security guards. Clara Thorne was committed to a mental institution, her career in ruins, her reputation utterly shattered by her public spectacle. The Eco-Community Project, my stolen dream, was put on indefinite hold, her investors pulling out faster than the tide. I watched it all unfold from the shadows, a cold, dark satisfaction settling in my soul. I had not laid a hand on her, yet I had stripped her of everything she valued: her sanity, her reputation, her career, her carefully constructed public image. I did not return to architecture immediately. Instead, I found a different path, using my unique artistic vision to create art installations that explored themes of justice, betrayal, and memory. My work was dark, thought-provoking, and deeply moving, often incorporating elements of folklore and the subtle psychological horror I had mastered. This time, however, it was under my own name, and for myself. I became known for my unsettling, beautiful art, and I was fulfilled not by Clara's destruction, but by reclaiming my own voice and artistic soul. Years passed. My art gained international recognition, my exhibitions drawing crowds eager to experience the unsettling beauty of my vision. One crisp autumn morning, an anonymous package arrived at my gallery. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was a replica of a specific motif from one of my earliest, most personal architectural designs, a design I had never published and had only ever shown to Clara Thorne, years ago, in a moment of naive trust. Attached to the wooden bird was a small note, handwritten in an elegant, familiar script, almost perfectly mimicking Clara's hand, but not quite. It read, "The whispers never truly stop, do they? They just find new ears." A chill snaked down my spine, colder than any Havenwood winter. Clara, still institutionalized, was incapable of sending this. It implied someone else knew, someone else saw, and perhaps someone else understood or even participated in Clara's downfall, inspired by my art. Or worse, perhaps Clara, despite her madness, had found a way to send a message, proving her torment isn't quite over. The horror was that my art, born from a desperate need for revenge, had now created its own echo, its own legacy of unease, and I might not be the only one hearing the whispers anymore. They would always find new ears, forever echoing through the dark, silent chambers of the world.